Hi, it is now week number six, and we're still talking about sectionalism, and this time we're going to talk a little bit about society and what the cities look like between the north and the south and what the differences are. So this week I'm asking you to do a flip grid. I wanted to change it up, make it a little bit different. You're probably sick of forms. Hopefully you're not sick of my lessons here, but I want you to, it's kind of a two-part. You're going to follow the directions, you're going to go to the thing links, you're going to look at some past projects for thing links. We would have done this together, but obviously we can't. So you're going to look at last year's thing links, and they really kind of try to show you the differences between the north and the south. So it'll be very, very obvious about what the differences are between the north and the south. In the north, you're going to see factories, you're going to see immigration, and you're going to see the growth of cities. While in the south, you're not going to see the growth of cities. You won't see a lot of immigration unless it's an added amount of influx of slavery, believe it or not, and you're not going to see an increase in factories. So I'm going to take you through this now, and then I'll do a couple of housekeeping things at the end. Okay, so differences between the north and the south in the 1800s. Okay. So first thing I want you to learn is transportation. So obviously we don't have cars, we don't have trains. We do have trains, not in the beginning. Then we have increase of railroads, right? But we don't have airplanes, we don't have buses, we don't have cars. Okay, so we have in the north, factories and cities, they have miles of road trails. They're not the roads that we know and think of, but there was a national road. And the national road connected the western states to the east. If you go out to Ohio, you'll actually see the real national road. And then we have our Erie Canal, which goes through New York and really connected the Hudson River to the Mohawk River, and then further to the Great Lakes. So this connected, just think about it, connected the east to the west, connects the east to the west. If you remember anything, remember that. And this is how we got goods back and forth. And then of course we talked about steamboats, and then we also talked about the railroads in the north, and we talked about the transcontinental railroad, and that is just what really brings the growth of cities along the northwest and then out west. But in the south, we don't have that. There's a reluctance to growth because they're so focused on their agriculture. So the south only had about 10,000 miles of rail, and that was by 1860, and the war broke out in 1861. Of course, they used their river system as their main source of transportation. And if there was railroads built, where the railroads were built was Richmond, Virginia, where there was a bit of a factory system and textile mills. And cities, of course, sprang up along riverways like we looked at the Native Americans. They would settle by rivers and lakes. For the same sort of reason. Sometimes water also provided power. So, of course, just like cities springing up along waterways, eventually you're going to see cities spring up along the railroads as well. So the society of the South, much different from the North. The South, of course, we have this picture on my left where there's a big plantation house, the master's house, you have acres and acres of land, and in the north you have this busy, bustling city. Eventually immigrants would come to inhabit there, they would find jobs, they would find work, there was paid labor in the north, and in the south, clearly there wasn't. There was a slave system, a hierarchy that we'll dive into a little bit more, but really a small group of people controlled what happened in the South. So in the society in the South, yes, there was we could say a very rigid social structure, and 5% of the white farmers were plantation owners who owned 100 or more slaves and most likely 100 or more acres. There's about 5% of them, and as I said, they control the South. Very little need for, not little need for education, but there was no actual schoolhouse where children went. They were tutored. Religion was important as well. Again, the wealthy plantation owners, they were the ones who controlled the politics in the South and the economy. And the economy of the South was based on cash crops, specifically cotton and tobacco. So this was really important to the South. It made them very, very wealthy and very rich. This is just kind of reiterating what I've said. Remember that in the South, if you didn't have a tutor, you probably didn't go to school. So many kids could not read or write. And many children, like children in the North, worked in factories. Many children worked in the fields as well. African Americans in the South, there were some free blacks in the South, but they were mostly sharecroppers, and like it reads here, they were forced to wear badges and pay extra in taxes, and of course live separately from the whites. The Jim Crow laws, which we'll get into hopefully by the end of the year. Many of these men and women had skills, whether it was from blacksmith or carpentry. They could be servants, laborers, cooks, things of that nature. But mostly African Americans were slaves, and even on the plantation it was divvied out like that. There were field hands, there were house slaves, there were slaves, there were again blacksmiths, carpenters, nursemaids. Children were playmates to the master's kids. So it was definitely a very deep-rooted society, the slave society. We call it cottonocracy, actually, in the South. I'm going to skip the notes over here. Society in the North, much different. We have an influx of immigration from 1820 to 1860. That's your first influx. Obviously, people aren't going to come to your nation in time of war. So we see our second influx around 1880. Cities become certainly more crowded. You'll see New York City, Boston, Philadelphia grow to be very large cities, very economically sound cities, and of course, people want to go there from other countries. Neighborhoods grew in the cities. Yes, there was not a lot of sewage. Disease grew rapidly, and the streets, they were not paved, so there's a lot of dust, although immigrants were told, right, that the streets were paved in gold. And we know that was certainly not always, well, was never the truth, right? So society in the North, there were still, many of the people were still farmers. So outside of the city, we still had a lot of farming. Of course, in the city, there wasn't farming. And then most of the immigrants from other countries would come to the North. Again, they were not coming to the South. The first wave was the Irish because of the potato famine, and the Germans. And the Germans were farmers, and they usually settled towards the back country. Some of them did occupy mill and factory work as well. And we're going to skip over this, but I just want you to take a look at this, the geography. We did this a long time ago, the geography, so I'm not going to go over that too much. Again, the transportation, society, immigrants settled in cities, more Northerners were moving to towns and cities. African Americans in the North were free, but they certainly were not treated as equal, but they were free. And again, cities lacked sewage and paved streets. And then the economy, which is what we went over last week, the North was the center of the Industrial Revolution, and their economy is based on manufacturing and factories. So again, for the South, it's a little different. We know that in the South, agriculture is robust because it's a favorable growing season, has a favorable growing season. The economy, again, this cottonocracy where we have a small group of people getting very wealthy very quick, and based on this cash crop cotton and the use of the cotton gin, and obviously unpaid labor we have with slaves. Very deep rooted in the South and very difficult to